Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our already fourth webinar in the Building a Data Science Team series. I am Lara Savanay. I'm the Community Manager at European Leadership University. And before we get started today, I would like to quickly introduce ELU and also this series. First of all, a big thank you to David Stephenson. David, thank you for being our speaker for today.
Good to be here.
Thank you. And ELU is a next generation university. So we were founded just a couple of years ago, and we launched our flagship program in data science, our master program in data science in early 2019, with a focus on the competency and skills development of our learners. So we see that in the markets, and for example, in the Dutch market, which is our focus, there's a skills gap between the skills that the talent, sorry, I just lost you for 1 second. A skills gap between the talent that is coming into the market that has graduated from university and the skills necessary on the job market. So this is why we talk actually with people in the industry when we're creating our curricula and are focusing specifically on getting our learners the practical experience. Now, at the same time, as we are working in the Dutch market, we've also seen that among recruiters and people in the data field, there's still some misunderstanding or confusion about the field. Of course, data is very sexy, it's very hip and trendy in the past decade, but it's not always so well understood. And it's for this reason that we also wanted to offer this free training series on building data science teams. So in the previous webinars that you can also find on our YouTube channel, we've already spoken about the recruitment of data professionals and the skill set that they require. And today we will be talking about management strategies and leading these teams. So again, thank you, David, for joining us. David is the founder and the managing director of DSI Analytics. He is also faculty at the University of Amsterdam and has previously led teams and done consultancy for brands such as Adidas, ABN AMRO, and eBay, and Coolblue. So a lot of experience to be speaking from. So I think we'll be learning a lot today. Also today with me is Christella. Christella is also a part of the ELU team. So if you have any questions or any technical issues, please reach out to us in the chat. Now, a final logistical issue, you are free, of course, to send in your questions during the talk. So you can do so either through the Q&A or the chat box down below, and we'll make sure to also touch base on those before the end of the talk. So without further ado, thank you everyone again for joining. Happy that you're here. And David, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Good to be here. I've tuned in for some of the previous broadcasts. Actually, some people I know here from the Netherlands have done the previous ones. So it's been good to participate in that and good to join. It's a really interesting topic that we're talking about today in terms of managing teams. And I think it's really critical. I find that it's really a difficult one, and we'll get into some of the reasons for that. It's really broad. Some of the issues that we'll talk about span a lot of different topics and pretty complex. So I'll try and cover them touching on at least the main points and then have some time for questions towards the end. But of course, we won't be able to dig into anything in particular. But I want to start by giving a little background on myself, just to help everyone understand the context that I have and sort of where I'm speaking from in this topic of managing data science teams. So by way of introduction, so I am from the US, did my PhD in mathematics and computer science from Cornell University. And so what I did from there is, after finishing, instead of going into academia, I thought I'd go into industry. And I started off with a boutique consulting firm based in the US. So we had a lot of different applications of applied mathematics. And then that's before really we were talking about data science. There were some much more specific applications of probability theory and such. Did that for a few years, really digging into the heart of some of these advanced analytic methods and programming them and implementing them and stuff. So very, very hands-on at the start of my career. After a few years doing that, I made a switch to go into the financial markets. And that was sort of, back in the 90s, the finance world, Wall Street and everything, that was sort of like the sexiest job for physicists and mathematicians, right? So everyone was going to Wall Street, and it's actually really interesting work, but it was also very technical, very much looking at probability theory, advanced mathematics, coding it up and seeing, okay, how can we get value? But in this sphere, it was much less research oriented and much more oriented to very tangible results, right? So if you made a mistake in what you developed, it could easily cost thousands or even millions of dollars, right? So more of a business focus, working a lot with MBAs, working with people who are very practically focused. All right, so then that was the next step that I did. Moved to the Netherlands in 2006 and worked for a company called strategist, which is risk management. Then went on to eBay. And so in 2010, 2012, eBay invited me over to head up their global business analytics, right? So what was interesting there is essentially you're working with global units and you're saying, how can I bring business value across different departments using BI, using advanced analytics or basic analytics? So really it was something which was saying, forget about the theory. We're not really focusing on advanced analytics if we don't need to. The most important thing is find an application that's going to move the business KPIs. Okay. And at this point, I'm also managing a team which is global. Here we've got people based in Shanghai. We've got people on the ground in Toronto, South Africa, South America. And you're working with a lot of different analysts at different experience levels and also different cultures. Right? So things start to get more and more complex in that way. And that was an internal role that I did for about 4 years. After that, I left and started off on my own. And that's when I started DSI Analytics. And the idea with DSI Analytics was to say, how can we help companies who either have an existing data science program or want to start one? How can we help them move forward very quickly and establish something or develop something which they're going to keep internally, right? So it's really focused on helping companies grow their own internal sources. But what I found when I was doing that is I found that there was really a lack of strong leadership within a lot of these companies. And I found myself playing an interim management role, right? So not really just coming in as someone advising or someone building something specific, but really helping these companies either launch a completely new program or take over as an interim director, in which case I was actively managing and even helping to recruit the staff for a lot of the clients that I had over the periods of months or even years in some cases, right? So then you're really starting to see some of the shortcomings that existing data science teams have, especially in the areas of management and leadership. Okay, and I started really collecting these ideas and thinking, how can I help companies to more systematically lead their teams, right? Develop the skills they have. So part of this is, goes into the work I do with the University of Amsterdam, where I'm leading courses for professionals who will come in for several-day trainings and try and develop specific skill sets related to data science. And part of those are related more towards leadership functions. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So just really quickly, what I'm doing here is I do strategy workshops to help, just inception stage. And I do these trainings, some of which are through the University of Amsterdam and some of them are private. With companies that bring me in. And there's been several dozen companies that I've trained staff at in different skills, which I'll mention later on. Probably the bulk of my work is actually going in and helping hands-on with program development at companies. And then also I'll do some knowledge development work. I've written a book, which is available in, I think 6 or 7 languages now, including Dutch, published by Financial Times Press. I've chaired the Predictive Analytics World Conference the last several years in the UK. So just kind of all these different things that I've been doing, just kind of to give you the context of where I'm coming from and the perspective that I've been developing over the years. Some of the clients I've had, which and I mentioned. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about sort of what some of these issues are that we're going to go through. I'm going to start by talking about the leadership role in general, then the unique challenges of data scientists, our expectations of data scientists, and then close with some practical advice. Okay, so these 4 areas. And when we start with the leadership role, what's important to remember with this is that companies are really in different situations when it comes to leading data scientists, right? Some companies have a dedicated data science leader who is themselves a data scientist, and other companies are hiring more junior or meteor data scientists and putting them under leaders who are not themselves data scientists. And I've seen both of these happening, and it happens roughly 50-50 split in terms of how companies are doing this, right? Whether the data science manager is themselves a data scientist or not, okay? So I'm going to show you some numbers from a recent poll by O'Reilly. So about 2 years ago, June 2018, O'Reilly Media did a survey of 11,400 data science people, sort of people who are interested in the field, in their database across the globe. So this is a global survey, June 2018, and they said, look, your data science teams, who is it who sets their priorities? Okay, and as you can see, only 28% of respondents actually said a dedicated data science lead, right? Nearly half of them had a product manager setting the priorities for the team. Okay. So this is important to remember because your lead for your data scientists may not be a technical lead. Okay, then they asked them, okay, who's determining the key metrics for your project success? Again, you can see, okay, so this is not setting the priorities, it's saying what determines whether your project has actually succeeded. And here you can see that it's now 36% still the product managers. Okay, quite a number of them are the executive staff, and then even a lower amount in terms of the data science lead. Okay, so we've got these two different angles here. You know, who is leading it? Is it someone who's a technical lead or a non-technical lead? Now, the thing is, there's not necessarily one right way to do it. What you see if you look more into this paper is that the more experienced, the more developed teams tend to gravitate towards the data science leaders, right? So the more experienced you are, the more likely it is you're going to get a technical lead. But initially, it's probably going to be someone who's a non-technical product manager. Okay. The challenge is this, right? So if you're a, let me go back to this slide. If you're a technical lead, okay, then what you need to do is you need to really, you'll understand what your data scientists are doing. But what you need, your challenge is to really bridge the gap between your data scientists and the business. Okay, so you have to be the person who explains to your data scientists why what they're doing is important, how to set the priorities. But the way you have to push yourself as the manager in this case, as a technical manager, is you have to push yourself to really understand the business, because your background is most likely a very technical background. Okay, so as a data science manager in this situation, you've got to really stretch yourself in a business dimension. If you're a non-technical manager, you probably are also already highly skilled in understanding the business, understanding the departments. And in this case, what you have to do is you have to really push yourself to understand the technology, to be able to communicate with the data scientists on your team, and then to present them the understanding that you already have inherently. But the challenge you've got, and I've seen this too, I've seen this at companies where you've got a non-technical lead, is that this person can very easily be sort of snowed under by the technical discussion. So the people in their team can start talking in a very technical way, and the non-technical manager doesn't necessarily have the discernment to be able to sort through all the technical details they're having and get the right priorities, okay? And if you don't work really hard as a non-technical manager, you can really end up in a situation where you're allowing your team to work on something that's not the right technical solution. And I've seen this before, and it's not really a good sight, because you know that half a year down the road, a year down the road, I can see it coming that the project is not going to be successful because the manager doesn't have enough technical insight. Okay, so they can push past this, but it really takes that work on their part. So when I talk about a technical manager or a manager that has to make sure their team has the right soft skills, right? So part of your job as a manager is to make sure that when people are coming in, especially the junior people, but also the meatier people, you have to make sure that they have the business skills, the soft skills they need to succeed. So in terms of the most foundational ones, okay, the most foundational skills you have to monitor or train for in your staff is the communication skills, which I call the storytelling. The corporation skills, which is understanding the different departments around you, both in a vertical way and a horizontal way. So understanding how things work top to bottom and understanding how people in other departments work. And then the project framework and tooling, right? So what do I mean by this? I mean, how to pace yourself, how to work in Scrum teams, how to work with different systems like Jira and Confluence, right? So what's going to happen if you don't have this? So your data scientists are coming in. Typically, they know how to make charts, they know how to make graphs, but almost none of them who I've met who are, within just a few years of coming out of school, almost none of these data scientists know how to communicate effectively in a way that's really clear to a non-technical audience. They'll make a PowerPoint presentation, they'll make a chart or a graph, which is mind-numbingly confusing, okay? And they'll present this to a business stakeholder who will just their eyes will glaze over, okay? So I find a really significant part of the work that I do, managing teams, is reviewing the content, the presentation, the slides that my team comes up with, and just telling them, look, please clean this up, please change this, please, alter your visual assets that you're creating in a way that you're really telling a story which is going to communicate to a non-data scientist. Okay, so it's a skill I try to build in them over time, but as a manager, it's a really critical role that I play, is to serve as that gatekeeper, someone who's going to review their communication, their presentations. When I talk about thriving in a corporation, I'm talking about knowing how to communicate with people around you. Knowing what's important when you're talking to the marketing team, knowing that the marketing team, they need things which are clearly communicated, which are very visual. They're not going to need a lot of details. Knowing that when they're talking to the finance team needs very solid, accurate numbers. They don't need the visual displays that the marketing team needs, but they need things to be extremely accurate, and they need things to be on time. And that's because that's how finance runs. Okay, so as you walk across the different business units within a corporation, you know that there's different expectations, different backgrounds that each of them has, and the data scientists don't necessarily realize that. And as a manager, I need to help them understand how to approach each of their stakeholders in a way that works for the different stakeholders. And that's sort of what I mean by thriving within a corporation. The project frameworks and tooling, we'll talk about this more later when we talk about sort of helping the data scientists pace themselves. But essentially what's going to happen is your data scientists are going to come in typically from an academic background where they've got weeks or months to do a project. It's a very clear endpoint to their homework assignments, to their thesis, to their papers. The way of working that they've developed in a university, it won't work in a corporation. It won't work in the types of projects we're doing. Okay, and so as a foundational skill, you want to help make sure that your data scientists know how to work within a project framework, which works in an unclear, highly chaotic, or uncertain environment. Okay, so those are some of the foundational skills that you as a manager need to shepherd them through and help them to develop as they grow into more senior and media staff. You as a leader need to also develop certain business skills, some of which are general business skills you need for leadership, but they have to be tailored to the aspects of data science, which are high degrees of uncertainty and a highly technical nature with non-technical stakeholders, right? So the two primary skills we have with leadership are learning how to set expectations and build trust with your stakeholders, especially because you're not sure what you're going to deliver. You're essentially working in an R&D environment. And if you're, you have to know how to be able to communicate the uncertainty involved. And then determining the right business questions. Okay, we know that a very high percentage of data science projects ultimately fail. And it doesn't mean that the project was done poorly, but there's a lot of uncertainty in it, right? So what we want to do is at the start, we want to really identify the business questions, which are going to bring the right value and also have the highest likelihood of success. So these are two skill sets you wanted as a leader, but also as you're developing your team and as your team members are growing from junior to media to senior levels, and you're giving them more and more responsibility, you want to grow these abilities within your developing team members. Okay, and then there's some other skills which you may not specifically train them on, but you as the leader want to have enough insight into to be able to kind of protect your team against some possible landmines. So landmines related to privacy and data protection, multicultural dynamics, and even, of course, office politics. And we're seeing the multicultural aspect come more and more into play because people are moving around, because the demand for data scientists brings people from other countries and mixes them quite a bit more. Just a very simple example of it once, I led a team where most of the people were Dutch and one of the team members was French, right? And after a few weeks, the Dutch people were coming up to me and complaining that the French person would always disappear for lunch for 2 hours. And they thought this was completely unacceptable, and this person wasn't a team player, and what were they thinking and such. And I had to sort of explain to them that, you know, in France, going for lunch for 2 hours was sort of the normal cultural thing, right? And on the other side, I had to explain to the French person that going for 2 hour lunch in the Netherlands is not considered normal, right? So this is just one example, but there's hundreds of these multicultural issues that come up. And you know, you want to kind of be aware of them and possibly even specifically address them systematically. Okay. So that's just kind of an overview of some of the soft skills. And as a leader, you need to have enough insight on this to be able to guide and train your team. Because if you're managing a data science team and you're only focused on the technical part of it, okay, then you're not really setting yourself up for success within an organization, okay? Unless you're deep down into a highly technical company, you know, you're working with a specific research team at Facebook or Google or a university, right? Unless that's the case, which 99% of the time it's not going to be, you really have to make sure you've got a handle on the soft skills that are related to data science. Okay. Prioritization. As a manager, you want to be aware that there's really 4 general areas that you can produce value in. Okay, so this is the Gartner Analytics Ascendancy Model, which came out around 2012. And I like to use this just to really illustrate that, yeah, machine learning and AI, you know, is really cool. We're talking about voice recognition, image detection, recommendation engines, that type of stuff. Things sort of towards the top of the curve here, right? These are all the sexy things that people want to do. But when we talk about value from analytics, there's a tremendous amount that comes from just bringing the data and answering basic questions, okay? And as a team lead, you're gonna decide where your team's time is going. What we find, and what I often tell, you know, the more junior staff is that, yeah, you're thinking, you know, you spend a lot of time studying this in university. This is what you're really interested in. This is where all the Coursera courses are going, you know, how to use NLP and such. But your business stakeholders are going to really appreciate anything you bring here. Just answering basic questions, just getting the data in front of them, that for them is going to be extremely valuable. And as a leader, you want to make sure that they're putting enough time into that. But at the same time, recognize that there's strong potential that your stakeholders, you know, the people in marketing, the people in finance, are going to keep asking more and more questions in this area. They're going to ask for more and more data, more and more deep dives. And what you as a leader need to do is you need to really protect your team from not needing to constantly answer questions. Okay, so this role as a gatekeeper, this role of protecting your team from too many requests is really key for managers, okay? Also, what you need to realize is that this is an area up here which you need to pace in a long-term way. You have to say, okay, how can I think of long-term projects which are going to fall into these areas, the more advanced AI and machine learning? How do I present those in a way which is going to minimize the risk of the projects, keep my data scientists interested, and then hopefully also kind of feed through this R&D loop, okay? Because that's what your data scientists are going to want to spend their time on. Okay. Figure 8 has a number of reports that they do annually, 2017 and 2018, surveying data scientists in the US. And in their survey, 36% were spending more than half of their time on R&D. Okay, 36%. So you'll see that some data scientists in certain positions can do a lot of R&D, but most of them are not, right? Most of these people are not going to be spending most of the time on R&D. And this is a really key question, how to balance that out as a leader. And we'll come back to that in a little while. Yeah, I'm going to show you another Gartner curve here. As a leader, you have to figure out sort of how you want to pace your development of projects. Again, a lot of you know about Agile already. You know about sprints and how to go through sprint processes, and you manage your backlogs and such, and iteratively produce value. Okay, so you're producing an MVP, you're doing the next iteration. But what a lot of managers don't do is they don't realize that they need phases before that to make sure they're headed in the right direction. Okay, So whereas this is a process of iterating over months or years, we also want to go through this sort of lean startup or proof of concept phase. Okay, so this is something that people are more attuned to in the data science world. Okay, and you'll see a lot of people saying, okay, let's do a proof of concept. Okay, the data science teams, they'll say, let's try something with a recommender engine. Let's try something with natural language processing or image processing, right? And what we've seen over the last couple of years is we've seen data science teams do these sort of endless proof of concept cycles, where they'll try something out and they'll try something else out and they'll try something else out. And they don't actually graduate from this proof of concept stage into the production stage, right? So this is one danger we're seeing. But what's actually even more pervasive now is we're seeing people jumping straight to the lean startup stage, the proof of concept stage, without a good reason for why to do it. Okay, and I've been guilty of this myself in the past. Okay, someone comes up with an idea, they say, let's try this cool machine learning technique. Boom, we jump straight into a POC. Then we jump into the production. And then a year later, or two years later, we suddenly realize, hey, I've spent all of this time developing a machine learning tool, which actually is not what the business needs. So as a leader, what you really need to do is you need to take that to stop before your POC and ask the question, what is it that the business really needs? Okay, from data science. And this is where we start talking about the design thinking stage. Okay, so this is another Gartner diagram that they came out with a few years ago, which illustrates the fact that, look, you know, at the very start of this process of starting a data science project, make sure you start with design thinking. Make sure you get the stakeholders in the room. And for those of you who aren't familiar with design thinking, essentially, there are these 5 different stages of it where you empathize, you talk to your stakeholders, you think about the customers, and you say, what is it that we really need? And then you go through the brainstorming process and you collect your ideas together and kind of hash through them. Okay. But as a leader, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're starting with this empathize process, this design thinking step, before you even start producing machine learning POCs. Okay. Another point is you want to understand that even once you produce your working code, that working code is that little black box. So this is a diagram that Google put out in a paper they came out with in 2015 called the hidden technical debt of machine learning or something like that. And it illustrates the fact that even once you've produced the machine learning code, there's a huge infrastructure that has to go around it to make this applicable in production. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind. And you have to say, okay, what is it that's going to measure the success? Okay, so this is something where when we talked about the 2 different types of managers, the technical or the non-technical, if you're a non-technical manager, probably you've started out with business metrics. You've started out saying, hey, this project is successful, my team's data science project is successful if it increases click-through rate or it increases, decreases operational cost or something, right? If you're a technical data scientist, you're going to be more inclined to start with the statistical metrics. You know, I'm going to minimize my area under the curve. I'm going to minimize my mean squared error, that type of thing. Okay. You have to be really disciplined about which of those metrics you're focused on. Most likely, you should really focus on the business metrics when you're starting on a project. Okay. Second thing about the leadership role, you want to think about talent retention. And this is really an interesting one. You know, I know there's a lot of talk about how, data science is the sexiest job of the 21st century and such. And everyone wants to be a data scientist and it's really cool and everything. And here's a quote from LinkedIn, demand for data scientists is off the charts and such. But this is really sort of a bit of a two-edged sword, and it's not everything that it appears to be, right? So there's a lot of demand for data scientists, a lot of people wanting to be data scientists. A lot of data scientists who are getting approached for new jobs. Okay, so you can see in this survey from 2018, most of the data scientists on your team will get approached for new jobs on a regular basis. There's a high turnover in data scientists. Okay, so this was also a survey showing that In 2015, 25% of data scientists had been in their role for fewer than 2 years. Okay, this means two things. It means that most of the people on your team are new, either straight out of university or at very least not extremely familiar with your business. Okay, so most of the people in your team don't really understand your business. Probably they don't even clearly understand how to work with a company. Okay, they only understand academic environment. So you have to take this into account as a manager, because it really places a lot of emphasis on your role of making sure they understand the business, making sure they can communicate with the business, because most of the people in your team are not going to understand the business. Okay. Good. Unique challenges with data scientists. So I'm going to open this up to sort of, if you could ask yourself the question, what are the unique challenges in managing data scientists? Okay, so I'm just going to open it up to you and give you a minute for people to respond. And I think you have to respond in the chat room. So just take a minute to think about it and feel free and go ahead and put that in the Q&A or the chat. I think you can do it with or without your name.
Yeah, if you can use the chat, that would be best, because then you can also see each other's answers. Maybe in the meantime, David, there's actually a question from the Q&A.
Oh yeah, I see it now, sorry.
So John is asking, regarding determining the right business questions, is there a criteria or checklist you would suggest to prevent going on a wild goose chase?
Yeah, so what I do is I typically start with a business model canvas, which you can easily find if you Google it. Essentially, it's a framework to just start understanding the business, right? So you say, what's important to my business, what's important to my customers, right? So you're starting from the ground up. And then you can go to, there's a whole number of these canvases you can use to walk yourself through the process. Another one put out by the same company is the value proposition canvas. So you're really saying, okay, what is it we're offering our end customers? How can we make that better? Okay, so you're starting with the business motivation for it. Once you get to that motivation and you start getting a use case developed, then you're going to start to develop it based on your technology. You say, okay, what data needs to be in place for us to develop a technology solution or a data science solution to address this business problem, and the business problem, of course, is rooted in these canvas discussions. Okay, but those initial discussions, you always want to have the stakeholders, the non-data science stakeholders in the room, and hopefully a broad perspective of them. You want people who understand strategy, people who understand your technology, people who understand the customers. Okay, and those people, as they're in the room, will help keep you from starting off on a wild goose chase. Because if you come up with some idea and say, hey, I think it's a great idea to do a recommender engine because it seems like a cool project. Hopefully someone else in the room who's really familiar with your customers or some other aspect of your business, at that point will say, no, that's not what we need because this, and this. What we really need is that and that. So really key to get the business together in a workshop or some kind of brainstorm to stop things at the beginning if it's not really going to bring business value.
Thank you. And in the meantime, we also do have some comments coming in through the chat on the unique challenges. So for example, one comment is that data scientists are often promised the world by a company, and it might be hard to keep them being happy as a manager. So this is about talent retention. Okay, good.
Can I see that? I'm not sure if I can see this chat, Anna. Do I have access to that, or otherwise I'll just let you read them off to me?
I think if you click the chat in the Zoom controls, you should be able to open it. Some other challenges that are mentioned: organizational maturity, senior management awareness about data science, and managing expectations.
Okay, true.
Also, using data scientist skills.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. I'll go ahead and kind of say some of the things that I thought of. So what's really key, what I always tell like when I give trainings, what I always tell, especially the more junior data scientists, and I keep, in every module that I give, I keep coming back to this. And I say, as a data scientist working in a company, what you constantly have to do is you constantly have to understand the perspective of your colleagues and stakeholders. Okay, so everything we talk about, I tell them again, look, when you're talking about communication, think of their perspective. When you're talking about deadlines, think of their perspective. Okay, so always put yourself in the shoes of the non-data scientists. Okay, this is what I tell them. So I'll say the same thing as a manager. What you really have to do is you really have to put yourself in the shoes of your data science team. Okay, this is easier to do if you're technical. If you're a non-technical manager, it's a little bit harder. Okay, so that's why I want to take a few minutes to really focus in on understanding what our data science team members are like and what makes them different from other teams. Okay, because of course management has its own requirements, and there's a lot of trainings for how to be a good manager and and these general management skills. But specifically for data scientists, I want to focus on what's different about them than a normal employee. Okay, and I want to divide it into these three areas. The personalities of data scientists, the interests of data scientists, and the tasks that they do. Okay, so focusing on the personalities. Understand that your data scientists are going to be quick thinkers. Okay, they're going to be people who probably did really well in school, right? They learn things really quickly. They can pick things up, especially of a technical nature. Okay, this means a couple things. One, it means it's more difficult for them to communicate with people who don't think as quickly because they're not used to slowing down. They're not used to going step by step. Okay, it also means they're easily bored. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind with your data scientists, especially as you're managing them and thinking about long-term. Okay, understand that you have to treat them in a way that keeps them constantly learning, constantly experiencing new things, and not doing repetitive tasks. Okay, data scientists are generally used to working alone. Okay, you've gone through a university system, you've studied analytics, you've studied computer science. A lot of this work that you do alone. You sit for an hour to study something, you sit for 2 days to program something. They generally like to work alone. And they often have, not always, but often they have difficulty mixing with non-techies. So you'll see the data scientists hanging out with other data scientists. Okay. I'm generalizing a bit. I'm also saying this as someone who is a technical person, so I'm kind of characterizing myself a little bit. But as a manager, especially if you're a non-technical manager, you want to take these things into consideration because it's going to help you understand their personalities and think, how can I make them more effective at what they do? How can I help to alleviate some of the complications or difficulties this might cause? And how can I also make their lives a little bit better? Okay, and I'll talk about sort of how to alleviate some of these potential pitfalls from this. On the interests of data scientists. Okay, so these are people who really have a high passion for technology. They want to study artificial intelligence. They've heard about it. They've really put a lot of effort into learning about AI, all the different methods, the courses they've done. Okay, they're really passionate about the technology. And they've come into the job really expecting to use those methods. They also want to keep learning. Okay, the field of AI, machine learning, it's constantly evolving. There's new things coming out all the time. And their expectation is they should keep learning. Okay. If you're not ready for this, this is really going to be potential pitfall, right? Because what's going to happen is you're bringing this person in straight out of university, straight out of a master's program, and you're telling them to do something which is going to benefit your business, okay? That may not be interesting for them, okay? So I've known people, or I've known managers of data scientists who literally have said, look, my company wants me to do this project, but I think it's not interesting. It doesn't have the cool technology in it, so I'm simply not going to do it, right? I just want to work on deep learning or something. So you'll find that some of these, of course, most of them will do what you ask them to do, but some data scientists simply won't if it's not sufficiently interesting for them, right? You may not realize that until several months down the road, okay? You may not realize that the data scientist on your team is spending most of their time, or at least a significant portion of their time, doing advanced analytics that really are not helping your business, but they find interesting. And it happens a lot. So you want to keep this in mind. Be really aware that your data scientists, they have a passion for technology. They want to learn the newest state-of-the-art methods, okay? And you have to sort of control that. You have to be aware of that. Hopefully you can find tasks for them to do that they want to do. But if you don't, there's a good likelihood they'll either do stuff on your time that you're not aware of, or they'll look for another job. Okay, so good to be aware of this. In terms of the tasks they're doing, this really relates. And I'll show you some statistics on this. Very often the data scientists in your company are doing work that they don't enjoy. Okay, which often is a reason for them to look for new work. The work that they're doing is extremely difficult to track. Part of that is because it's a lot of R&D. We talked about how 36% of data scientists are spending more than half their time on R&D. That's really difficult for you as a manager to keep track of. Okay, so you're gonna have to find a way to manage that. Your data scientists are also accustomed to long-term deadlines, especially if they're in PhD programs. You've got someone coming out of a PhD program where they possibly had 1 or 2 years to do their last project. It's going to be difficult to get them to work in a fast-paced, short-term deadline environment. So you need to be aware of that. Okay. You also have to understand that the projects you're giving them have a high risk of failure. Okay. Data science, a lot of it is R&D nature, and you as a manager have to set the expectations to manage the high risk of failure. Okay. Yeah, so those are what I see some of the unique challenges with data scientists. And I've realized I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try and go a bit faster. We talked about the analytics ascendancy model, and that what I want to point out here is no matter what your data scientists are doing, they're going to have to do a lot with data. Okay, so what we find that what often happens is we bring our data scientists in and we give them a lot of data tasks to do. Okay, we say, okay, we want you to build this model, but first you have to get this data. Then you have to clean this data. Then you have to build this data pipeline to automate it. And they end up doing a tremendous amount of work on data. Okay. So Crowdflower, which was actually the previous name of Figure 8, the survey I showed before, they asked their respondents, they said, look, what do you really enjoy doing? And you can see what data scientists want to do is they want to build the algorithms, okay? They don't want to work on data. Then they asked them, what do you specifically not like doing? And this was it. If you ask any data scientists, most of them are going to say, hey, I don't want to spend all my time on data. I want to spend my time on the algorithms. But then they asked them, what do you actually spend your time on? Well, sure enough, most of the time these data scientists are spending is on the work they don't want to be spending time on. Okay, so it's good as a manager to be aware of this, and it's good to try and mitigate this in your teams. So what I tell companies I work with, I say, look, make sure that you've got specialists whose primary job is getting the data for your data scientists. Don't turn your data scientists into BI experts. Because I've seen it happen. It happens in a lot of companies where essentially the data scientists are made to do the work of BI or data engineers. And what happens is the data scientists don't like it, and they generally are not nearly as efficient at it as a specialized data engineer. So it's lose-lose all around. So you don't want your data scientists to be forced to spend all their time doing the data engineering. Okay. Really, I don't have time to go into this slide too much, but this one really just illustrates, as we walk through model development, there are certain specific points where your data scientists are going to be involved, but they're never going to be complete owners of these processes. Always at every stage, your data scientists are going to work with other types of skills. They're going to work with the data engineers, the project management, the business experts, okay? Don't turn your data scientists into people who have to do every single task at any stage. Okay, make sure they have the support they need from the non-data scientist specialists they need. It's a really key part of managing your team. So I talked about, I promised I would talk about some recommendations for these challenges. I talked about the personalities of of data scientists and how they are easily bored and not as social. What I do as a manager for them is I try to give them special trainings in communication, right? I think this is important because I think it makes a huge difference. I actively encourage them to really learn about the business, to go to business meetings, get involved with different projects. And as they're involved in different projects, this helps stretch them. And even if I can't give them the coolest technologies to work on, even if they're not doing a deep learning project or using, some advanced, Spark streaming, at least they can satisfy their curiosity by learning about different parts of the business. Okay. The fact that they like to work alone, I like to encourage them to have, the daily stand-ups, work together in pairs to help pace them and help keep the communication going. And then also I really encourage them to mix socially. When I've got a junior person on the team, I say, look, go eat lunch with the marketing team, go eat lunch with people, in the sales team. Don't just, use lunch to check your phone. So I really try and actively communicate that social mixing with other departments. In terms of their interests, we know we've got this heavy expectation to use methods and a heavy interest in technology and such. I want to make sure that their projects are steered by business KPIs. So when they're talking about what they want to do or what projects they have, I will try and keep it front and center. Look, we're moving this KPI. We're trying to have definite business value and keep that emphasized for them, constantly keep that in the front of their mind. Sometimes this, ultimately has to be a hiring decision, okay? When you're interviewing candidates, you need to interview candidates who have a passion for bringing business value. Because if you hire someone whose expectation is just to use strong technology, then that's really a lose-lose situation, okay? To help them feel that they're at least continually developing and learning, even if it's not using the tools they want on the current project, you want to also be able to encourage them, at least within the team, to do knowledge sharing. Okay, so you have these brown bags where they're talking about technology. You encourage them to go to conferences or take trainings. You give them, a certain number of hours each week to do discretionary projects. So the hope then is that, okay, yeah, they are working on something which isn't, really the technology they want, but they've got enough stimulation to keep them in their job, to keep them motivated, to keep them excited about working where they're working. Because like I said, and I've seen this, really, and if you're a data scientist or know a lot of data scientists, you'll realize this, but otherwise it may be a surprise to you that most data scientists are not happy in their jobs. At least a high percentage of them feel like they're doing work that's not interesting to them and they're disappointed in the work they're doing. And as a manager, you want to try and mitigate that. Okay. Lastly, in terms of tasks, we talked about how there's these different challenges. And I mentioned it's really important to support them with dedicated data engineers, dedicated product owners, people who can help them in the areas that they're not super strong in, so they can focus on the areas that they're strong in, which is specifically the algorithms in the case of data scientists. It's difficult to track them. You really want to encourage them to use project software. So when I'm with a client, one of the things I really push is using Jira, using Confluence, putting your goals down, putting the details of your user stories down, adding comments on a daily basis, that type of thing. So as a manager, this is a really effective tool to make sure that you're tracking the progress that your team is making. Because if you don't do this, what's going to happen is 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, you're not going to know where your data scientists have put their time. And that's a recipe for disaster. Okay, which brings me to my next point, is that you really want to hold them accountable through regular reporting. Okay, so you've got your stand-ups, you're asking them, what did you work on yesterday? What are you going to work on today? Some people use PPPs where you say, every week or something, send me your progress, your plans, and your problems. But you want to keep track of them, not necessarily looking over their shoulder, but enough that you know what they're doing and they know that you know what they're doing. And if they're stuck on something, you can help them through that. And lastly, this relates also to the use of Jira and Agile or Kanban. You want to help your team members develop smaller deliverables. If it's Scrum, they'll be time boxed. If it's Kanban, of course, you're not working with time boxing, but you want them to be small and agile so that they can keep pace and not get lost in a long, amorphous deliverable, which ultimately has a high risk of failure. Okay, which is going to also, increase the frequency of your communication. If you're working with Scrum, you've already got frequent deliverables, on a bi-weekly basis typically. Okay, but don't let your data scientists go long-term without reporting what they're doing and really keeping track in an agile way. Because like I said, if they operate in a company the way they operated back in grad school, that is definitely a recipe for disaster. I've got a question here that says, do you prefer data labs or mixed teams with non-techies? Yeah, that's a good question. So the question essentially is, do you have a centralized data science team or do you mix the teams together? And I've seen companies do both, and there's advantages and disadvantages to both. The advantage of a centralized team is they can really have the synergies where all your data scientists are together. They can produce more advanced models more quickly. The disadvantage is more likely that they'll lose touch with the business and what they produce won't bring business value. Okay, so when you have the data scientists like embedded in a business unit team, they're definitely going to bring value, but the value they bring is going to be more at the bottom of that analytics ascendancy curve. It's going to be, firefighting and deep dives as opposed to producing more advanced AI or machine learning. Ideally, what you want is you want a dedicated team where you're sort of, they've got some companies have these tribe models where you bring people in a matrix structure. Ideally, they're working closely with whatever business stakeholders best understand their products, but also working closely enough with a technical specialist to let them move very quickly from a technological perspective. Hopefully your leadership has enough, like your data science manager, director, VP, has enough seniority that they can bring those people together as necessary to produce the business products. So they can bring together all the technical resources and the business resources in a sort of temporary team towards a project. Oh, and lastly, as I mentioned before, you do need to make sure you protect your stakeholders from request overload. Often we do this through, if you're using Scrum, you'll do this to the product backlog. If you're not using Scrum, you as a manager have to actively go to the director of marketing who keeps bombarding your team with questions and say, look, my team doesn't have time to answer every question you send them. They need to focus. And your data scientists will thank you profusely for that. Okay. There's some more considerations related specifically to Agile and Scrum, but I don't have time to cover those now. Let me just take the last few minutes to ask if there's any other questions in closing. Okay, I've got my email at the bottom of the slides here. If you have questions, feel free to email me. And also, if you want to know more about the trainings that I do, specifically some of the areas I covered or covered in different trainings, those are also on my website. So you'll see a link to the trainings page on that website. So feel free to also check those out. And so that's it, if there's no other questions, and I will then pass it back to Laura.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. I think it was a great hour with so much resources and information and also some insight from your own experiences. So I very much enjoyed it. Also, a big thanks to everyone in the audience and your contributions via the chat and your questions. Quickly, next week, we will be having our 5th session. We'll be speaking in a bit more detail about something that David has already touched upon. How do you work with other teams as a data scientist or as a data science manager? So we hope we'll see you again next week. Again, thank you so much, David, for joining us, and also thank you to the participants.
Thank you, David. Thanks, everyone.